it's this really strange quirk of human math that you can receive, literally exactly 100 compliments in a single day.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Like you can have people telling you that you did a phenomenal job leading the morning meeting, that your presentation was, absolutely flawless, that you look fantastic, that your ideas are innovative.
Yeah, all the good stuff.
All the good stuff. And you will feel genuinely good about all of that for, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. The glow just kind of fades almost as soon as you step into your car to drive home.
It really does. It's so fleeting.
But if you get one piece of criticism, just one sideways glance from a colleague, or like one passive-aggressive, vaguely worded comment in an email chain, or even just one deeply negative reply from a complete stranger on the internet.
Oh, that one single comment just moves right in. It completely bypasses all your logical security systems, unpacks its bags, decorates the guest room of your brain, and it just stays up with you, pacing the floor at 2 a.m. for the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
You can recite the exact phrasing of that criticism, like word for word, long after you've completely forgotten the names of the 100 people who praised you earlier that day.
It absolutely does. The compliments just seem to, evaporate the second they hit the air, but the criticism is somehow carved into stone, instantly. So welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are looking right at you, the listener, and we are taking on a mission to explore one of our most profound and honestly most frustrating human vulnerabilities.
That really is frustrating.
It is. We are pulling apart the mechanics of human interaction, psychology, and resilience, all centered around this one single powerful theme: how to keep other people's words from disturbing your heart. And the core question we want to answer for you today is this: why do we so easily believe one negative opinion while instantly forgetting all the reasons we should believe in ourselves?
That is just the perfect question to frame our entire conversation today, because simply telling someone to, ignore the haters or just brush it off, that is practically useless advice.
It's the worst advice. It never works.
Right. It's completely surface level, and frankly, it utterly fails when you are actually in the middle of feeling the visceral sting of rejection. So what we are going to do today is trace the entire anatomical path of a negative comment.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even start?
Well, we were starting from exactly why the human mind is so devastatingly sensitive to negative opinions. We're looking at the evolutionary and biological realities of that sting. Then we're going to move into how we can stop manufacturing our own suffering through overthinking, and how to actually build an unshakable confidence from the inside out.
I love that. Unshakable confidence.
Exactly. And finally, how to fiercely protect your inner peace instead of exhausting yourself trying to please every single person you encounter.
So if we want to figure out how to build this psychological armor, we really first have to examine the vulnerability itself. Like, why is our peace so incredibly fragile to begin with?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Because it seems, entirely irrational that a grown adult with a career, a family, and this complex life can have their entire week derailed by a few careless syllables from someone they barely even know.
It does feel irrational, especially in our modern context, but it actually makes perfect, flawless sense when you look at it through the lens of human evolutionary biology. It fundamentally comes down to a survival mechanism. Words affect us so deeply because of this profound, hardwired human need for acceptance and belonging.
Okay, so it's not just us being overly sensitive.
Not at all. If you trace human history back to, say, the Paleolithic era, for the vast majority of our species' existence, belonging to a group wasn't just about feeling good or having social status or having people to, spend the weekend with. It was quite literally a matter of life and death.
Because, an isolated human doesn't last long against a saber-toothed tiger or a harsh winter.
Exactly. If you were rejected by your tribe, if the collective group decided you were a burden or a nuisance or untrustworthy, you were cast out into the wilderness. And an exiled human was pretty much a dead human. Wow.
Yeah, and our brains evolved in that exact environment. Therefore, the human nervous system developed to be hypervigilant to any sign of social rejection. This is why criticism often hurts far more than compliments help. A compliment basically just tells your nervous system, you belong. You are safe. The status quo is maintained. You can just relax for a moment.
Right. It's just a baseline check.
Yes. But a criticism acts as a flashing, blaring red alarm bell that screams, Warning, your social standing is compromised. You are at risk of being cast out. You are at risk of dying.
Which perfectly explains the physical sensation of it. Because, when someone insults you or you realize you've made a social misstep, it doesn't just feel like a fleeting cognitive thought. You feel a literal drop in your stomach.
Oh, absolutely. Your chest gets tight, your cheeks flush, your heart rate spikes. It's like we are carrying around these highly calibrated nervous systems of ancient hunter-gatherers, but instead of worrying if the village elder is going to exile us from the caves, we're having a biological panic attack because someone on social media left a sarcastic comment on our vacation photo.
What's fascinating here is that there is an actual psychological study that perfectly illustrates this biological reality. It's often referred to as the cyberball experiment.
Cyberball. Okay, how did that work?
So, researchers put participants into an fMRI scanner to monitor their real-time brain activity. They told the participants they were going to play a simple virtual game of catch on a screen with two other real people who are in other rooms.
Just passing a digital ball back and forth.
Just passing a ball. For the first few minutes, the three digital avatars pass the ball back and forth equally. Everyone is included. But then the researchers manipulate the game so that the two other players just stop throwing the ball to the participant. The participant is suddenly, deliberately excluded from this completely meaningless digital game.
Just left standing there on the screen while the other two play. That is so sad, but also it's just a game.
Exactly. And what the fMRI scans revealed was really groundbreaking. The moment the participant realized they were being socially excluded, the anterior cingulate cortex of their brain lit up.
And what part of the brain is that exactly?
That is the exact same region of the brain that registers physical pain.
Wait, really? The physical pain center?
Yes. So when someone criticizes you or rejects you, your brain doesn't just process it as a bad idea or hurt feelings, it processes it as a broken bone. The pain is biologically, physically real.
Okay, wow. So that completely validates the initial sting. If our brains are quite literally interpreting criticism as physical injury and mortal danger, we obviously can't just positive think our way out of that initial physiological drop.
No, you really can't. You have to feel it.
But there has to be a difference between that initial unavoidable sting and the kind of deep lingering self-doubt that ruins an entire week. Because, sometimes a comment stings and we just brush it off an hour later, and other times a comment burrows into our brain and fundamentally changes how we view ourselves. It feels like our minds are made of Velcro for negativity and Teflon for positivity.
That is a great way to put it, Velcro and Teflon. And the distinction there lies in the concept of resonance. A single careless comment only lingers in our minds for days or weeks when it manages to hook into a fear we already secretly harbor about ourselves.
Oh.
Think of it like acoustic resonance. If someone hits a tuning fork, only the objects in the room that share that same frequency will vibrate. If a piece of criticism hits you, it only vibrates and creates lasting psychological suffering if it matches a frequency of self-doubt you are already carrying.
So if someone criticizes something I am absolutely unequivocally confident about, it doesn't stick. Like if someone tells me I'm a terrible driver, but I've never been in an accident, and I know I'm a highly defensive, competent driver, I'm probably just going to think they're having a bad day or they're a bit unhinged.
Exactly. You just dismiss it.
Yeah, it stings for a microsecond and then it's gone.
Precisely. You don't harbor any underlying insecurity about your driving, so there is nothing for the criticism to hook into. It slides right off the Teflon. But let's say you privately struggle with imposter syndrome at work. You constantly worry that you aren't quite smart enough or qualified enough for your position, and you're just terrified someone is going to find out.
Oh yeah, the classic imposter syndrome.
Right. So if a colleague then makes a slightly dismissive comment about a proposal you submitted, that comment hits the exact frequency of your hitting fear. That is where the devastation happens. The criticism finds a welcoming home in your own pre-existing vulnerability. We basically end up granting incredible power to other people's opinions because we are using their words to confirm our own worst fears about ourselves.
But, I want to push back on that just a little bit. Is it always our self-doubt giving them power? Or are some words just objectively sharp? Like, can we really blame ourselves for feeling the sting when someone is just being cruel?
What's fascinating here is that acknowledging the sting is actually the very first step to neutralizing it. You aren't to blame for feeling the pain. Remember the anterior cingulate cortex. The pain is real, but the prolonged suffering, the weeks of agonizing over it, that happens when we weaponize their passing thought against our own core identity.
Right, the suffering is where we get stuck. And this dynamic becomes terrifying when we scale it up to modern life. because human beings evolved to manage the social dynamics of maybe, 50 to 150 people over an entire lifetime?
Yeah, Dunbar's number. That's our tribe.
Yeah, our tribe. But today, we open up our phones and we are suddenly intimately exposed to the opinions, criticisms, and judgments of thousands or even millions of people.
We have created a technological environment that completely overwhelms our biological hardware. It's just too much. The psychological load of trying to appease or even just process the opinions of thousands of strangers is completely unsustainable. We are constantly triggering that pain center, constantly simulating physical injury and social exile over interactions with people who have absolutely no real bearing on our actual survival.
And if we rationally know that our biology is working against us here, and that a stranger on the internet holds no actual power over our survival, well, logic dictates we should just close the app, shrug, and go make dinner.
But we don't.
We don't. We still stare at the ceiling at 2 a.m. thinking about it. So that disconnect between logic and our biological reaction means we have to systematically change how we evaluate the source of these opinions. If we are biologically forced to care about opinions, we need a rigorous vetting process for whose opinions actually get through the door.
We do. We have to interrogate the psychology of the critic. This requires a fundamental shift in how we view human interaction, because most of us walk around assuming that when someone offers a critique or an insult or a judgment, they are operating as an objective, rational observer who has accurately assessed our value. We treat their words as a verdict.
Like a judge banging a gavel.
Yes. But psychologically speaking, when someone lashes out, particularly with unprovoked, harsh, or just disproportionate negativity, it is almost never an accurate reflection of your value. It is almost without fail a broadcast of their internal state.
Okay, so they aren't holding up a mirror to us. They're holding up a megaphone to their own pain.
That is exactly it. People speak from their own level of perception, and more importantly, they speak from their own current level of stress, pain, or insecurity. Imagine a manager who is deeply terrified of losing his own job. He feels incompetent, he is sleeping poorly, maybe his marriage is struggling. He comes into the office and absolutely berates a junior employee for a minor formatting error on a spreadsheet.
Oh, we've all seen that happen.
Right. He tells the employee they are sloppy and lack dedication. If that junior employee takes that criticism to heart, they will internalize that they are a failure. But the reality is, the manager's outburst had almost zero to do with the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet was merely the trigger for the manager to externalize his own internal panic and feelings of inadequacy.
So people are often speaking from their own pain or stress.
Yeah.
Are we essentially just catching their emotional cold when we take their words to heart? Like absorbing someone else's unprovoked criticism is like walking into a crowded room where someone is violently coughing. And instead of stepping back, we just stand there and take deep breaths.
That is a perfect analogy. You are catching their emotional cold. They sneeze, their unresolved insecurity, their bad morning, their jealousy right onto you in the form of a harsh critique. And if you don't have a strong psychological immune system, you catch the virus.
You just take it right in.
You take their transient emotional state and you metabolize it into your own permanent self-doubt. You have to remember that human beings are incredibly prone to judging situations they do not fully understand. We look at fragments of information and our brains rapidly fill in the blanks to create a cohesive narrative, often assuming the worst to protect ourselves.
And this is the ultimate danger of social media, isn't it? The internet operates entirely on fragments. We are looking through a tiny keyhole into someone else's life. We see like a 10-second video of a mother dealing with a toddler's tantrum in a grocery store, and suddenly the comment section is filled with thousands of strangers diagnosing her parenting style, her moral character, and predicting the child's future criminal record.
It is absolute insanity when you step back and look at it objectively.
It really is. Why in the world would we let someone who has only looked through a keyhole dictate the value of the entire house?
Because the brain's negativity bias doesn't automatically differentiate between a valid critique from a trusted mentor and meaningless noise from an anonymous stranger. It just registers threat. Period.
Yeah.
We have to consciously manually build a filter that separates constructive feedback from meaningless negativity.
How do we do that?
Well, constructive feedback requires context. It comes from someone who actually knows your baseline, who understands your goals, and who has a vested, genuine interest in your growth. It might be uncomfortable, it might sting, but it is delivered with an underlying foundation of care. Meaningless negativity, on the other hand, is just someone else's emotional static. If you don't actively categorize it as static, your brain will try to turn it into a song, and it becomes the miserable soundtrack to your own life.
Okay, so we've established the biological trap. The sting is real, it's evolutionary, and it hurts most when it hooks into our own insecurities. We also know, logically, that most critics are just projecting their own psychological baggage onto us. So if we know all of this, why is it so incredibly hard to let it go?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. If I know the person yelling at me in traffic is just having a terrible day, why do I spend the next 4 hours replaying the interaction in my head, thinking of all the devastating comebacks I should have said? This brings us to the actual mechanism of our ongoing misery. The initial comment is just a spark, but we are the ones who supply the gasoline.
Yes. We supply the gasoline through the cognitive process of rumination, or overthinking. This is how we take a minor transient social injury and systematically mutate it into a chronic psychological condition. In mindfulness practices and certain schools of psychology, there is a very famous, very precise concept known as the 2 arrows. It perfectly encapsulates this entire dynamic.
Oh, I've heard of this. Walk us through the 2 arrows, because I think this is the exact point where we transition from being victims of biology to being architects of our own suffering.
Absolutely. So the first arrow represents the initial event. It is the harsh word from a boss, the passive-aggressive text from a friend, the outright rejection, or the unfair critique. That first arrow is fired by the external world, it hits you, and it causes genuine pain. As we discussed with the pain center of the brain, that pain is unavoidable. That is simply the cost of participating in human society. You cannot dodge every first arrow.
Right. If you interact with humans, you will occasionally get hit.
Exactly. But the second arrow is entirely different. The second arrow is our reaction to the first arrow. It is the rumination. It is lying in bed at night thinking, why did they say that in front of everyone? What is wrong with me? I always let people walk all over me. I should have stood up for myself. Now everyone in the office thinks I'm weak.
Oh, wow. I do this all the time.
Most of us do. The initial comment was the first arrow. But replaying the conversation, dissecting the tone, extrapolating a minor failure into a permanent character flaw that is you, picking up a second, third, fourth, and fifth arrow, and repeatedly stabbing yourself in the exact same wound.
We basically become our own attackers. The critic only insulted us once. We insulted ourselves 50 times that afternoon by replaying the memory. It's like being trapped in a movie theater where the worst review of your life is playing on a continuous loop.
That's exactly what it is.
And the physical toll of that has to be massive. If the brain doesn't know the difference between a real physical threat and an imagined social throw, then every time we replay the conversation, aren't we just flooding our bodies with stress hormones over and over again?
Absolutely. You are continuously triggering the release of cortisol and adrenaline. Your body remains in a prolonged state of fight or flight simply because your mind refuses to let go of the memory. This is what we call unnecessary suffering. The initial pain was inevitable. The subsequent suffering is entirely optional and self-manufactured.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
If you extrapolate this across the globe, the amount of human time, energy, and cognitive bandwidth lost every single day to replaying conversations is staggering. It hollows out our productivity, it stifles our creativity because our mental RAM is tied up in imaginary arguments, and it completely erodes our baseline happiness.
Okay, but where is the line? Because if I just completely block out everything that goes wrong, doesn't that make me delusional? I mean, I need to reflect on my mistakes to grow. If a client tells me my work was subpar and I just say, well, that's a first arrow, I refuse to shoot a second arrow, and I never think about it again, I'm going to lose my business. How does a listener differentiate between processing a tough conversation at work and just wallowing in unnecessary suffering?
It is a critical distinction, and it really comes down to velocity and destination. Processing has a destination. Rumination is a circular track. When you are processing a tough conversation or a piece of critical feedback, you are operating like a scientist extracting data from an experiment. You step back and ask objective questions. Is there validity to their point? What specific behavior can I adjust? Do I need to clarify a boundary, or do I need to improve a skill?
Right, it's analytical.
Exactly. Once you have extracted the actionable data, you make a decision, you formulate a plan, and the reflection naturally concludes. Productive processing leads to action.
So processing is moving forward on a timeline. The event happened, I analyze it, I extract the lesson, I step forward into the future.
Precisely. Rumination, on the other hand, has zero forward velocity. It leads nowhere. It is just repeatedly reliving the emotional temperature of the event without any intent to learn, adapt, or move forward. You aren't extracting data, you are just marinating in the feeling of being wronged or feeling inadequate. If you are asking yourself, how do I handle this specific technical issue better next time, you are processing. If you are asking yourself, why do people always treat me like this, you are ruminating. One solves a problem, the other solidifies a victim identity.
That is a phenomenal diagnostic tool. Am I looking for a solution, or am I just marinating in the injury? But, it is one thing to understand the theory of the two arrows and the mechanics of rumination while we sit here in a calm environment. It is a completely different beast when you are in the trenches of everyday life, when your heart is racing and your inbox is filling up.
Oh.
We need to take this out of the theoretical realm and look at how this battle is actually fought in specific real-world arenas.
Oh, for sure. Context is everything.
Right, because the source of the criticism completely changes how we should defend against it.
We absolutely need different strategies for different arenas. You cannot use the same emotional defense mechanisms across the board. Navigating a vicious comment from an anonymous troll on social media requires a vastly different psychological posture than navigating a misunderstanding with your spouse or critical feedback from your department head. If we apply the wrong defense to the wrong arena, we either become entirely emotionally closed off or we leave ourselves completely vulnerable to continuous abuse.
Let's break those arenas down. Because if I treat a heavy-handed critique from my manager the same way I treat an anonymous Twitter troll, I'm going to get fired. But if I treat the Twitter troll with the same deep, thoughtful vulnerability I give my manager, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown.
Exactly. Let's categorize them by proximity and intent. Let's start with the furthest proximity, strangers on the internet or people you barely know in passing. This arena requires a hard, impenetrable, absolute emotional shield. You owe them zero cognitive real estate.
None at all.
None. They have no context for your life, your struggles, or your character. Their negativity is almost purely a projection of their own internal chaos. The strategy here is brutal efficiency. You block, you mute, you delete, you scroll past. You do not engage because engaging implies their opinion holds weight.
You don't try to win the argument because attending the argument validates their right to judge you. Okay, I love that. So, move closer in. What about the workplace? Coworkers, managers, clients.
The workplace is an arena of conditional relationships based on performance. It doesn't require an impenetrable shield, it requires a highly calibrated filter. When a boss or a coworker offers harsh criticism, your goal is professional objectivity. The strategy is to mentally strip away their emotional tone, their frustration, their stress, their poor delivery, and extract only the actionable data regarding the work itself.
That's tough, but I see why it's necessary.
You don't internalize it into your identity. If they say your report was a disaster, you filter out the word disaster and you focus on the fact that the Q3 numbers were calculated incorrectly. You fix the numbers, you leave their emotional dysregulation on their desk.
That requires treating yourself almost like a machine in that moment. Like, I am receiving data. The tone is irrelevant. The data is what matters. But now let's move to the innermost circle, because this is where the Velcro is the stickiest. Friends and family. You can't just block your mother, and you shouldn't strip all emotion away from your best friend.
The inner circle is undeniably the most difficult arena because the vulnerability is highest. Let's split this into two parts. First, friends who unintentionally say something hurtful. This requires the practice of grace and immediate communication. We have to assume positive intent. Instead of silently retreating and ruminating for 3 weeks shooting yourself with second arrows, you have to be brave enough to say in the moment, hey, ouch, that comment actually really stung, and give them the opportunity to clarify or apologize.
You hand the first arrow back to them and say, did you mean to shoot this at me? And 99% of the time, a true friend is horrified and immediately works to repair the rupture.
Precisely. But then we have family members. Particularly family members who fundamentally misunderstand your choices, your lifestyle, or your values, and who offer constant, low-grade criticism. This dynamic requires profound, ironclad internal boundaries. You have to undergo the difficult grieving process of accepting that you may never get their full approval. Your peace in this arena relies on consciously releasing the need for them to understand your path.
I picture navigating these relationships like becoming an emotional martial artist. Specifically something like Aikido.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, because when someone throws a punch in a traditional fight, let's say it's a harsh critique, a misunderstanding, a heavy expectation, the instinct is to tense up, plant your feet, take the hit directly to the chest, and try to absorb all that force. You fight back with equal force, But an emotional martial artist doesn't absorb the energy. When the attack comes, they step slightly to the side. They let the momentum of the other person's negativity, their projection, their anger pass right by them. You acknowledge the energy flew past you, you see it clearly, but you don't let it knock you off balance. You don't take it into your body.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is a brilliant visualization. And mastering that sidestep is the core of emotional resilience. How we handle these minor everyday frictions, the dismissive coworker, the misunderstanding with a sibling, the rude cashier, actually sets the baseline tone for our entire nervous system.
It's all practice.
Exactly. If we tense up and absorb the blow every single time, if we fly off the handle at every slight, we are continuously signaling to our brain that the world is a lethal threat. But if we practice that martial arts sidestep, if we practice calmness, we are literally rewiring our neural pathways to understand that we are safe, even when we are misunderstood or disliked.
But you don't just wake up one day as a black belt in emotional Aikido. You have to train. You need a dojo, and you need specific, repeatable techniques to practice when the criticism actually comes flying at your face in real time. We need practical defense mechanisms that we can deploy in the heat of the moment.
We do, and the foundational technique, the absolute bedrock of emotional defense, is deceptively simple but incredibly difficult to execute. The pause. Before you react, before you defend yourself, before you fire a text message back, you must insert a physical pause.
It sounds so basic, almost cliche, right? Just take a deep breath. But in the heat of the moment, when your chest is tight and your face is hot, a pause feels like an eternity of agonizing vulnerability. Why is that specific split second of doing nothing so neurologically critical?
To understand the power of the pause, we have to look at what is happening chemically in your brain. When you receive sharp criticism, your amygdala, the primitive threat-detecting center of your brain, hijacks your entire nervous system. It floods your body with adrenaline. It prepares you to fight, to run away, or to freeze. Crucially, when the amygdala is fully activated, it diverts energy away from your prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is the rational, logical, adult part of the brain. The part that knows this is just a minor disagreement about a spreadsheet, not a literal tiger attack.
Exactly. The rational brain essentially goes offline. In that hijacked state, you are entirely reactive. You will say things you regret, you will escalate the conflict, or you will internalize the pain deeply. The pause, taking one slow, deep, intentional breath before opening your mouth or typing a reply, is a physiological hack. A deep breath expands the diaphragm, which stimulates the vagus nerve.
Okay, the vagus nerve.
Yes, and the vagus nerve signals the parasympathetic nervous system to initiate a calming response, slowing your heart rate. That physical slowing buys your brain the necessary milliseconds to bring the prefrontal cortex back online.
It is the physical space between stimulus and response.
Yeah.
In that pause, you transition from being a reactive animal to a conscious human. You regain your power to actually choose your emotional response, rather than just acting on sheer biological instinct.
And once you have taken that breath, once your rational brain is back online, you don't just react, you filter. You run the incoming criticism through a rigorous cognitive filtration system. We can break this down into 3 highly specific questions you must ask yourself in that space between stimulus and response.
Let's run through them. What is the gauntlet a piece of criticism has to survive before we let it into our hearts?
Question number 1. Is this opinion actually true? This requires setting aside your ego and practicing brutal honesty with yourself. If a coworker says you dominated the meeting and didn't let anyone else speak, you have to look at the data. Did you? If it is true, then the criticism is no longer an attack. It is an incredibly valuable opportunity for growth and behavioral correction. You adjust and move on.
Right. And if it's not true?
If it's demonstrably false, if it is completely unmoored from reality, then it is a projection. It belongs entirely to them, and you can discard it.
That makes a lot of sense. So, question 2 is about the source. Does this person really know me?
Right. This question instantly shrinks the perceived authority of strangers, loose acquaintances, internet trolls, and distant relatives. If someone does not know your heart, if they do not know your history, your struggles, and your baseline intentions, they do not possess the necessary qualifications to grade your soul. You cannot value the critique of someone who hasn't read the book but is judging the cover.
It's the keyhole again. Why am I letting someone who is looking through a keyhole tell me my house is ugly? But it's question 3 that I find to be the most powerful tool in the entire arsenal. Here's where it gets really interesting. The third question is, will this matter next month? I look at that question as a psychological time machine.
Oh, I love that phrasing. Explain how you use it.
So when you get a harsh email
at 9:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, or someone makes a passive-aggressive comment in a meeting, in that exact second, it feels like your entire world is collapsing. The anxiety is massive. It fills the entire room. It touches every part of your life. But when you ask, will this matter next month, you force your brain to jump 30 days into the future and look back at this exact moment. And almost every single time, you instantly shrink that massive anxiety down to its true, microscopic, trivial size. You realize, oh, in 30 days, I am not even going to remember this person's name, let alone the specific phrasing they use to criticize my project update.
It is a mechanism for forced perspective. Anxiety thrives on myopia. It needs you to be hyper-focused on the immediate threat. The time machine pulls you out of the emotional spike and places you back into the broader context of your actual life. And alongside this filtration system, true emotional defense requires an active shift in your daily focus. We possess a finite amount of emotional energy, yet we spend an inordinate, tragic amount of that energy trying to convert our critics, trying to prove our worth to people who have already decided to misunderstand us, while we entirely ignore our cheerleaders.
It's so true. We take the people who love us for granted while obsessing over the one person who doesn't.
Exactly. We need to consciously redirect that energy. You have to actively choose to water the flowers instead of watering the weeds. Focus your attention, your gratitude, and your vulnerability on the people who genuinely care about your well-being. And perhaps the most vital component of this entire defensive toolkit is the practice of relentless self-compassion.
This circles right back to the second arrow. If the first arrow is the criticism and the second arrow is our rumination, self-compassion is how we finally put down the bow and treat the wound. But self-compassion is one of those terms that gets thrown around so much it almost loses its meaning. It sounds like taking a bubble bath or lighting a candle. What is the actual mechanical practice of self-compassion in the face of brutal criticism?
The most practical way to implement self-compassion is to adopt the best friend standard. Think about the mechanics of how you interact with someone you deeply love. If your best friend came to you visibly upset, crying because a manager had unfairly humiliated them in front of the team, how would you respond?
Well, I certainly wouldn't agree with the manager. I wouldn't say, well, they're probably right. You're a complete failure. You should probably just quit. I would be outraged on their behalf. I would say that was completely unprofessional and unfair. You work incredibly hard. You're highly competent. And that manager's bad behavior does not define your worth as an employee or a human being.
Precisely. You offer immediate validation, contextual perspective, and fierce loyalty. The tragedy is that when we experience that exact same humiliation, our internal monologue instantly aligns with the critic. We say to ourselves, I am an idiot. Everyone knows I'm a fraud. I'm going to get fired. The practice of self-compassion requires you to manually override that internal monologue and forcibly speak to yourself with the exact same tone, the exact same grace, and the exact same fierce loyalty that you would automatically offer your best friend. We have to learn to let unkind words pass without volunteering to carry them around like heavy luggage.
You have to become your own best friend in the aftermath of the attack. So we've talked extensively about defense. We know how the biology works. We understand the psychology of the critic. We know how to stop shooting the second arrow. And we have a dojo full of techniques: the pause, the filters, the time machine, the best friend standard to deflect the noise. But relying purely on defense is exhausting. It implies we are constantly under siege. What is the offense? How do we build a psychological core so incredibly dense, a foundation so deep that we don't even need to constantly hold up the shield? We need to figure out how to move from simply surviving the outside world to fundamentally trusting our inside world.
This is where we reach the thematic peak of our deep dive. This is the transition point from merely surviving to actually thriving. Psychological resilience isn't just about getting really good at swatting away negativity. True, unshakable inner peace comes from actively building confidence from within. And the absolute cornerstone of that confidence is understanding that true self-worth grows from your values, not from other people's approval.
Values over approval. That is a massive paradigm shift, because most of society is structured to teach us the exact opposite from the moment we are born. Get good grades so the teacher approves. Wear these clothes so your peers approve. Hit these metrics so your boss approves. We are trained to view ourselves entirely through the reflection of other people's validation.
And that training makes us incredibly fragile. When your self-worth is inherently tied to external approval, you become a leaf in the wind. You are entirely at the mercy of the moods, preferences, insecurities, and whims of the people around you. If the crowd claps, you feel 10 feet tall. If the crowd boos, you feel completely worthless. Your emotional state is constantly being outsourced to the crowd. But when you do the difficult work of tethering your self-worth to your internal, self-defined values, you become deeply rooted, like a massive oak tree.
So how does that change the actual experience of being criticized?
Well, if you have sat down and explicitly defined that your core values are, for example, integrity, kindness, and meticulous hard work, and you know in your heart that you acted in alignment with those values during a project, then a critic's words lose their power to devastate you. If someone criticizes the outcome of the project, you don't experience it as a threat to your identity. You view their words simply as data. You can look at the criticism objectively and say, okay, the method failed and I can improve that, but my integrity and hard work remain intact. You don't spiral into self-loathing because your foundational root system hasn't moved an inch.
But this highlights a huge vulnerability for most people. How many of us have actually taken the time to sit down, perhaps with a journal, and rigorously define our core values? I mean, really articulate them, write them down, prioritize them so that we have an anchor ready when the storms of criticism hit. I think most of us just sort of float through life operating on a vague assumption that we are, good people. But a vague assumption isn't an anchor. Without a highly specific defined set of values, the first massive wave of public negativity just washes us right out to sea.
This raises an important question, doesn't it? That is exactly the problem. Confidence isn't a magical aura. Confidence is the byproduct of truly knowing yourself. The more you trust yourself, the more intimately you understand your own motives, your own flaws, and your own ethical boundaries, the less power careless words have over you. When you have done the deep introspective work to know who you are and what you stand for, someone else's misunderstanding of you becomes their problem, not your identity crisis. And this leads to one of the most liberating psychological truths you can embrace. A peaceful heart does not need to answer every criticism.
There is immense power in that. You do not owe the world a reaction. You do not have to attend every argument you were invited to. You can just let the invitation sit in the mail.
Exactly. The compulsion to constantly defend yourself, to explain yourself to people who are determined to misunderstand you, is born of the insecurity that their false perception of you might somehow become reality if you don't fight it. Rooted confidence knows that their perception is irrelevant to your reality. You can let them be wrong. There is profound, breathtaking freedom in simply letting other people be wrong about you.
I hear that, and a part of me feels incredibly liberated. But I have to push back here on behalf of the listener, because this can sound like a slippery slope. If I just adopt this mindset, if I decide my heart is peaceful, I don't need to answer to anyone, I just trust my own values, and I let everyone else be wrong, how do I make sure I'm not just turning into a raging narcissist? Is ignoring criticism a form of arrogance, or is it the highest form of self-awareness? Because arrogant people also ignore criticism.
It is a vital distinction to make, and it comes down to the structural difference between a wall and a filter. Arrogance builds a massive, impenetrable brick wall. Arrogance is actually a posture born of deep, unacknowledged insecurity. The arrogant person says, I am already perfect, I have nothing to learn, and therefore everyone who criticizes me is an idiot. They build the wall because their ego is so fragile that any piece of negative feedback would shatter them.
So arrogance is just insecurity wearing a really aggressive mask.
Exactly. Rooted confidence, on the other hand, doesn't build a wall. It installs a highly calibrated, selectively permeable filter. Rooted confidence says, I know my inherent worth as a human being, and because that baseline worth is secure and unquestionable, I can actually afford to look closely at my flaws and examine constructive criticism. A truly confident person actually welcomes constructive growth because it doesn't threaten their core identity. They can receive harsh feedback from a mentor or look at it and say, you know what, you're right. I completely messed up the execution of that strategy. I will do better tomorrow without spiraling into I am a worthless human being.
Because the failure is an event, not an identity.
Yes. But that exact same rooted confidence is what allows them to firmly, unapologetically reject meaningless noise and projection from strangers or toxic individuals. They know the difference between a lesson that will help them grow and an insult designed to tear them down. Arrogance rejects everything. Insecurity absorbs everything. Rooted confidence filters.
Arrogance rejects everything. Insecurity absorbs everything. Confidence filters. That is the exact blueprint. So what does this all mean for us as we pull all these threads together and wrap up today's deep dive? We started this journey with a very specific, painful question. Why do we so easily believe one negative opinion while forgetting the 100 compliments and all the reasons we should believe in ourselves?
Oh.
And through this exploration, we've seen that while it is deeply evolutionarily human to feel that initial biological sting of harsh words because of our ancient hardwired need for belonging, we do not have to remain victims to our Paleolithic biology.
We don't. We've learned that true inner peace isn't about escaping criticism or hiding from the world. That is an impossible goal. True peace is about recognizing that the critic is often just broadcasting their own unresolved pain. It is about actively intervening in our own minds to interrupt the toxic cycle of overthinking, refusing to shoot ourselves with that second arrow of self-manufactured suffering. And ultimately, it is about moving our center of gravity. It is the lifelong work of pulling our self-worth off the unstable, shifting sands of public approval and planting it deep into the solid bedrock of our own clearly defined internal values.
And before we let you go, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you head into the rest of your week. We spent an hour talking about deflecting criticism, filtering it out, surviving it, and protecting your peace. But what if we flip the script entirely? What if the next time you face unwarranted, harsh criticism, the next time someone throws a casual insult your way or misjudges your character, instead of seeing it as an attack that you have to survive, you view it as a perfectly timed opportunity?
An opportunity to actively practice the art of maintaining your own peace under pressure. Think of it like going to the gym for your nervous system. Every time someone throws meaningless negativity your way, it is a chance to test the strength of your anchor. What if their careless words aren't actually a weapon meant to destroy you, but simply the necessary resistance training that your inner confidence requires to grow stronger? Every single time you successfully insert the pause, every time you run their words through the filter, and every time you consciously choose your own peace over engaging in their chaos, your inner core becomes infinitely more resilient.
You are actively building that muscle. And the next time it happens, the weight feels just a little bit lighter. So as you step out of this deep dive and back into the loud, messy, highly opinionated world, remember this. We cannot control what other people decide to say. We cannot control their projections or their pain. But we are the absolute, undisputed gatekeepers of what we allow to take root in our own minds. The loudest voice in your life should never be someone else's criticism. It should be your own quiet confidence.